The powers unbalance me. Who is it that unbalances me? The Vatican, the British Empire, the Jews, everyone operating outside of me. But not me. I am untainted. The unbalanced people are outside. What game is being played?
Hello, dear friends of Kabala Podcast, once again with Mario Sabán.
Hello, how are you?
Shalom, Mario. How are you? I see you're cheerful, with a smile on your face, I suppose because of the topic we're about to cover.
Yes, because, it's a topic we've thought about a lot.
Yes, we have certainly given it a lot of thought because there was a certain level of worry.
Well, more than worry, because this word are very pessimistic. There was some doubt
On how to approach
It's
this.
a topic with many facets, that we must handle it with utmost discretion, with complete calmness, to reach a conclusion because it is difficult, or perhaps leave the topic open and not have to reach a conclusion. The topic can also remain open.
As we move forward and go through this process, we start to see where we're heading. So, let's reveal what the topic is. The topic is conspiracy theorists. Because there's always this idea of a global conspiracy spoken about in a very general way. First of all, and based on the conversation we had beforehand, we realized, or at least we detected, that there was a certain level of confusion around the concept itself. The term conspiracy theorist is a fusion of two words, obviously. Conspiracy and paranoia or paranoid. That's the first point. Then there's the specific concept of conspiracy itself, which inherently means that a conspiracy is carried out to overthrow, challenge, remove, or bring down a power that is already established. That's the starting point. So as we talk about this topic, what we're going to try to do is clarify it, break it down, and see where it leads us. The idea isn't to judge or dismiss these perspectives, but to understand how they are formed and why they resonate with so many people. From there, we can begin to have a more grounded and thoughtful conversation about what lies behind them. Let's keep an open mind and explore this carefully.
From my point of view, it seems to me that whenever people talk about conspiracy, it's because the conspiracy theorist feels threatened. They feel threatened in some way by a power that for them is invisible, but that nonetheless has a real presence in the world. In other words, there is a power operating behind the scenes that is holding all of this together. And in the context of Jewish history, we have faced an enormous number of accusations. The idea of a global Jewish conspiracy, based on a novel written by a Russian author living in Switzerland, was later adopted by the Nazis, who claimed that all Jews conspire on a worldwide level. Well, I'm Jewish, and I'm not conspiring against anyone.
Protocols of Zion.
Yes, the Protocols of Zion. Next, there is discussion of the British conspiracy against the American colonies and against Spain, linked to the Black Legend. Then comes the Vatican conspiracy, then the Masonic one. Ultimately, for the conspiracy theorists, the conspiracy is always in the Jews, in the Freemasons, in Catholics, in the Vatican. There is always a sense of paranoia. That's what makes it conspiratorial thinking. I do believe that on a global level there are interests at play. That's undeniable. But going from that to seeing those interests everywhere, or in a diffuse and all-encompassing way in the mind of the conspiracy theorist, is something else entirely. For me, there's a clear difference between real interests that engage in lobbying and the idea that someone is actively plotting a conspiracy for world domination. That, to me, is where paranoia comes in. As we said in our small private conversation, they are credulous because they are dogmatic. They are convinced that there is a conspiracy.
Sure.
So, someone who is convinced that there is a conspiracy is undoubtedly not only paranoid but also dogmatic. It's a conspiracy that cannot be proven in any way because it is impossible to prove. And the conspiracy theorist, in their paranoia, somehow brings what they consider to be evidence of that conspiracy. In reality, I think this thinking falls outside the principle of reality. What happens is that a real layer gets mixed in, real interests held by actual power groups. Pharmaceutical companies represent a form of power, the automotive industry is a power structure, the arms industry is also a power structure. And so the conspiracy theorist mixes these power structures, these power lobbies, with the idea of a conspiracy that seeks to control the world. Laboratories want to make more money, arms manufacturers want to make more money, and the only conspiracy I see here is materialism, the desire to make more money. That's what I see.
Yes.
Therefore, I say, and you articulated it perfectly, which is why we had to refine backstage the definition of what conspiracy is. The conspiracy theorist somehow perceives that manipulation is occurring directed toward power, if you like. And these lobbies undoubtedly engage in manipulation, undoubtedly for their power interests. But I don't think it's to control any power. I think it's to make more money. For me, the lobby issue is purely materialistic. So I believe more than a conspiracy, there is a worldwide imbalance of materialism here. Meaning, economic interest creates such a profound imbalance for all of humanity that power groups emerge seeking greater financial gain. It appears to me that this materialistic imbalance is conflated with the paranoia inside the conspiracy theorist. The conspiracy theorist mixes their paranoia with the power groups. Now, the power groups are real, of course they are real, but they don't conspire against anything. They just want to make more money. So, it seems to me that the conspiracy theorist mixes their paranoia with real power groups whose goal is financial gain, and that confusion fuels the narrative.
I'd like to add a bit of what we discussed before the conversation, because the feeling I have is that there's a kind of confusion around what the word to conspire actually means. To conspire is a conspiracy is a group of people who come together and develop plans to overthrow and establish power, whether that power is hegemonic or simply a power that is already in place. It's about organized action with a clear goal, not just speculation or fear. Understanding this distinction is key to seeing the difference between reality and paranoia.
That's fine, but the power they want to overthrow is because it's not aligned with their interests. And they want to overthrow it for a new power that does align with their interests. So in the end, we return to economic interests.
Exactly. So, of course, if we talk about a global conspiracy, then that global conspiracy would be a group of people who want to have power and who want that power in order to overthrow another power that is already established. So the question is, what is that other power? The power of God, the power of nature, the power of humanity.
It is impossible to overthrow. What power will you overthrow? Can the power of the divine infinite not be overthrown?
That is why I am saying there is a conceptual problem right from the start.
The conspiracy theorist doesn't believe that power is going to be overthrown, not in a conceptual sense. The term is distorted. What the conspiracy theorist believes is that there is manipulation by certain hidden powers. That is what the conspiracy theorist believes, the person we call a conspiracy theorist, even though this way of thinking is more paranoid than it is actually related to the word conspiracy, because the word conspiracy, as you rightly say, refers to overthrowing power. The conspiracy theorist doesn't say they want to overthrow power. In fact, the mystic has a much more radical relationship with power than the conspiracy theorist does. The conspiracy theorist wants to overthrow one power in order to put another one in its place, while the mystic says that power itself will eventually dissolve. So I would say that in relation to power, the mystic experiences a much stronger tension than the conspiracy theorist. The conspiracy theorist suspects that they are being manipulated, or I would even say they dogmatically believe that they are being manipulated. So what we call a conspiracy theorist is someone who believes they are being manipulated. The confusion lies in who is doing the manipulating. A hidden Jewish group, the Vatican, the British Empire, the Chinese mafia? Who is it? Or all of them together? The Bilderberg group? Or whatever else? And from there, reptilians. But beyond all that, the problem I see is that we are dealing, in a way, with a form of collective paranoia, because there are many of these groups built around collective paranoia. Yes, there is paranoia here. Now, do power groups exist? Of course they do. Can these power groups be criticized? Of course they can. In fact, from a mystical perspective, we do criticize these power groups, but mystics do not fall into paranoia. What does that mean? We don't think there is a single, unified conspiracy. Yes, there is manipulation by certain groups, but sometimes these groups are in conflict with one another. There is no unified group operating at a global level. Sometimes the interests of different groups clash. So, in a way, this is a message to the conspiracy theorist. There is no single conspiracy. What exists are many interests, what you might call small, localized conspiracies, but I don't see them as hidden. They are out in the open. They are interests of power.
But there is something much worse than this, which is the marketing of conspiracy, and I will explain to you what I think. It might be that hidden power that causes so much fear in the wrongly named conspiracy theorists is the one implementing this constant debate of strange theories and ideas that don't align with reality in order to generate distraction processes that ultimately benefit them. And in that sense, distraction becomes a form of control.
In other words, you are contemplating a dual conspiracy.
That's it, of course.
The conspiracy theorists are being used by the conspiracy for you. That is, the conspiracy theorists are the manipulated ones, and they don't even see it.
Exactly. That is the core issue. That is the problem with the mind, the conspiracy theorist's mind, which is a cycle.
From the perspective of Jewish spirituality, the Kabbalah. When one approaches contact with the matrix, so, upon entering the matrix, knows that everything happening within the system, as Luzzatto said, inclusive, although we find a conspiracy, even if a conspiracy did exist, it would still serve a function. So paranoia has a function, conspiracy theorists have a function, and power groups have a function. All of them are imbalanced. They are all forms of imbalance. The paranoid person is imbalanced. The conspiracy theorist is imbalanced, and if there are power groups that pursue only their own interests, they too are imbalanced. What this means is that we are talking about imbalances that feed into one another. They are imbalances that constantly reinforce each other. And until we reach Tikun Olam, the redemption of the world, its rectification, we all have to keep correcting ourselves. So when someone begins that process of rectification, they have to understand that they cannot participate in a pressure lobby for their own interests. Rectification means not fighting only for the interests of a single group. What Kabbalah proposes is that, first of all, everything that exists, cosmologically speaking, has a reason to exist, even if it affects us negatively on a subjective level. It affects us subjectively, yes, but it still has a place within the divine plan. So do conspiracy theorists have a role in that plan? Of course they do. Do power groups have a role? Of course they do. Do those who denounce power groups have a role? They do as well. It's the same as the prophet Nathan and King David. King David represented power, and the prophet Nathan confronted him, denounced him, and criticized power. Nathan had a function, and King David had a function too. Now, as mystics, we step outside the system. We have to look at it from the outside. We cannot get caught up in imagining conspiracies or denying them. We have to step out of that space. We have to step out of the imbalance of paranoia, the imbalance of conspiracy thinking, and clearly avoid participating in any power lobby, because that would place us in imbalance as well. Our task is to point out all the imbalances that feed into one another. In other words, this is not about system versus anti-system. It's about being a system. I stand outside the system in order to observe how the system is imbalanced, how it develops these attachments, these klipos, and what truly concerns me is how these imbalances feed back into each other. I'm imbalanced because I'm paranoid, but I justify that paranoia because there is a power structure. And why is there a power structure?
Give me 15 seconds and we will analyze these imbalances. Back soon.
Hey Mario, you're looking tan from the lights. What's going on with you?
I don't see you. Who are you?
Here, I am Nacho.
Hey, Nacho. How are you? This light is killing me. I need sunglasses.
Listen, there's another eye watching us. There are a lot of people back there. Hey, you, over there on the other side. Give it a like, subscribe, and join us. And if you want to collaborate in a more active way, here there is a QR that allows you to help us to continue and keep doing this podcast. You also have it in the link below in the comments. And on this Patreon, you'll find an online Kabbalah course in English to help transform your life and become happier. Mario, next time?
Sunglasses. Umbrella.
Yes, umbrella.
Mario, you ended by saying that there was an interaction among multiple imbalances.
An interrelation or an interconnection of imbalances. Let's see. There are many imbalances and each person has to work on them internally. To the extent that each of us works through our own inner imbalances, those imbalances won't manifest externally. So here's the key point. All paranoia is an imbalance within the person who is paranoid. Therefore, we shouldn't indulge paranoia. We need to work on it so as not to become paranoid. But the existence or non-existence of paranoia does not prevent us from understanding that, on the other side, there are also imbalanced interests within power. These are two different things, and I would separate them. The paranoid person feeds their paranoia through conspiracy theories about power groups, groups that do exist. From a spiritual point of view, no one is going to deny that these power groups exist, that they hold enormous power, and that they destabilize humanity. Why? Because they are not acting in the interest of humanity as a whole. Spirituality seeks the interests of all of humanity, not the interests of a single group. The moment you fight only for the interests of one group, you are throwing all of humanity out of balance. Humanity must work for the interests of humanity as a whole, that is Tikun Olam, the redemption of the world. So we need to hold an intermediate position. Conspiracy theorists have paranoia. Fine, they need to work on that imbalance, but we are not going to deny that there is a real existence of power groups that also destabilize us at the level of humanity. Those groups must be criticized and corrected, but without falling into paranoia. I hope the situation is clear. The situation is this. Yes, there are imbalances in the economic world caused by power groups. Of course there are, but that should not lead me into paranoia.
Certainly, but on the part of these individuals as well, we observe a lack of understanding of how power operates. Power operates, and it can operate from the occult. And yet, most miss the bigger picture.
The fantasy that exists, Nacho, the primary fantasy of the paranoid, is that there is a global power controlling everything,
Yes, that is
and that
correct.
is a fantasy. What exists are groups of interests that fight. If there really existed like a general power group, there would be no war. The conspiracy theorists will say that wars are invented.
Well, here, a person with these paranoid traits will tell you that there is an ever-increasing concentration of power.
A war is not the product of paranoia. A war is the result of interest tied to the sale of weapons, plain and simple. What arms companies want is to create wars in order to sell. That is not a conspiracy. It is a real form of power that expands its influence and throws all of us out of balance. So what needs to be done? It needs to be corrected. And once it is corrected, it's over. But it's very difficult to correct because of the enormous amount of money these industries control. We are facing a problem of imbalance in the paranoid individual, a psychological imbalance, and in the material realm, an economic imbalance. And these two imbalances are interconnected because economic imbalance leads to psychological imbalance and to many forms of paranoia. In other words, the paranoid person's paranoia is channeled through imbalances in the material world. So the paranoid person denounces the material realm as a conspiracy. And I say, sir, there is no conspiracy here. They don't hide it. They say it openly. They openly reveal their naked interest in the sale of weapons. So honestly, when I look at these imbalances, I don't see any conspiracy. What I see are exposed, visible imbalances in these power groups. And this is not a justification of my paranoia. It is simply an acknowledgement of the reality we can see. That's why I speak in a way about a feedback loop of clipo, a feedback loop of imbalances. We need to understand the imbalances that exist in the material realm, but those imbalances do not operate invisibly. In the material world, they operate in plain sight by supplying weapons to every country so that we end up killing each other in wars. It is a very visible power.
It is a very observable power. Now see that what I told you is no joke, not from a paranoid perspective, but from a perspective tactical of how a specific power group can operate in order to continue exerting its objectives. We're talking about real strategies, not imagination.
This is man's history, and that must be stopped in some way.
But what I wanted to say is this. We should be careful that all these credulous assumptions, all these dogmatic and radically credulous positions, confined within what we might call the conspiracy-minded worldview, are not actually distractions. Real distractions. Distractions that are implemented within the world of communication so that those powers with particular interests, not a single hegemonic power that controls everything, but specific interests tied to specific agendas, remain unnoticed while attention is diverted elsewhere.
Look, the question here is the following. The mystic, or at least the mystic within Judaism, that is within Kabbalah, is engaged in correcting our own imbalances. The conspiracy theorist, on the other hand, has become convinced of a reality that satisfies them enough to work it out within their own psychological fantasy. And so, they are not doing Tikun. Here the problem lies somewhere else. We have already spoken about conspiracies and about issues of power that represent social and economic imbalances on the other side. Now I'm speaking about us as people who are engaged in Tikun. Someone who is doing Tikun is working toward their own personal improvement and the improvement of humanity as a whole. The conspiracy theorists, convinced of this reality of manipulation, nothing against that supposed manipulation, which would actually be their own Tikun. They become convinced of their own paranoia and end up living within a paranoid system of security. In other words, the conspiracy theorist already has a sense of security because they have reached the conclusion that there is a conspiracy manipulating them and that they can do nothing about it. It's as if the conspiracy produces a sense of powerlessness when it comes to their own tikkun. Whether a conspiracy exists or not, whether lobbies exist or not, our task remains the same. We have to work on our tikkun, on changing our behavior. But the distraction does not come from power itself. The distraction is a form of self-distraction rooted in a psychological fantasy of believing that one has arrived somewhere. They have arrived at a dogma, at a conclusion. The conspiracy theorist believes that someone or something external is manipulating them. They reach that conclusion and then settle into a comfort zone because they feel they figured it out. This is not someone who is going to advocate for a real change of paradigm. They're not going to say, okay, I'm going to fight against these interests. No, they say, I understand that I'm being manipulated. Of course, they may try as much as possible not to be manipulated, but there is no inner change. Everything remains external. Once again, we return to the same issue. No one takes responsibility for their own inner change. Once again, it's the IMF is to blame. The European Union is to blame. Someone else is to blame. We are always looking for something external onto which we can project our imbalances, or for a scapegoat to carry all the blame. So let's be clear. Let's deactivate all the projections we send outward and activate an inner process of introspection and personal tikkun. But the conspiracy theorist does not do this. The conspiracy theorist externalizes everything and says, I am not imbalanced. I am thrown out of balance by hidden power. The conspiring power is what destabilizes me. And so they conclude, I am not the one who is imbalanced. I just have to protect myself from being destabilized by external power. And of course, this ends up legitimizing the status quo. I do nothing because I'm not imbalanced. Those on the outside are destabilizing me. The conspiring powers are destabilizing me, but I myself would be perfectly balanced. No, we are all imbalanced here. We are all imbalanced because if that conspiring power were to exist, it would exist precisely because we are imbalanced. So let's work on our own imbalances and stop projecting them in a fantasy onto others. Even if there are real imbalances out there in the external world, I still have to work on my own inner imbalances.
Of course, absolutely. Well, your own paranoia bunker isn't like a place of security. It's just a cage of your own making.
Paranoia is their security, and it's also an excuse for your responsibility. I am not the one who is unbalanced. The powers unbalance me. Who is it that unbalances me? The Vatican, the British Empire, the Jews, everyone operating outside of me. But not me. I am untainted. The unbalanced people are outside. What game is being played? He is playing at the hidden superiority. That is, everyone is unbalanced, but I am the only one who didn't get the conspiracy.
We have transitioned from a radical simpleton to an egomaniac.
A hidden form of arrogance. I am free. I am not the one who is imbalanced. The imbalanced ones are the power groups that destabilize me. It's true that power groups destabilize humanity, but not as an excuse to absolve myself of my own responsibility.
Thank you, Mario.
A hug.